Hey, we're moving on. Chapter 26, Fluid, Electrolyte, and Acid-Base Balance. This is Professor Queen, and we're going to be doing a short chapter today. It's not going to be made up of parts 1 and 2, just one set of PowerPoint. Let's begin. Let's take a look at the major fluid. We're going to be doing acid-base balance. So as an introduction, let's going to look at the major fluid compartments of the body. Now, body water contents, for all the body water contents, the babies, the infants, have more water, and they have low body fat, low bone mass. But in the adult males, 60% will be water. And in the adult females, about 50% will be water, and we do have higher fat content. We do have less skeletal muscle mass than the males, and this because the adipose tissue is less hydrated of all. Pretty much the water content is also less with the fat content of the female body. Total body water in adults would average about roughly 40 liters. The water content declines to about 45% in old age. And let's take a look at the two major fluid compartments. You have the intercellular fluid and extracellular fluid. So intracellular fluid right there, the yellow part, and then the extracellular fluid will be the red and the blue. The intercellular fluid compartments are fluid inside the cell and accounts for about 2/3 of the total body fluid. The extracellular fluid in two main extracellular compartments outside the cells and account for about 1/3 only of the total body compartment. The plasma is roughly about 3 liters, and the interstitial fluid is about 12 liters in spaces between cells. Also considered is also considered will be the interstitial fluid. Okay, the lymph, the cerebrospinal fluid, and humors of the eye, the synovial fluid, the serous fluid, and the gastrointestinal secretions. These are all parts of the interstitial fluid. And so, water is the universal solvent. And things that are dissolved in water are what you call solutes. Solutes are classified as either non-electrolytes and electrolytes. The non-electrolytes are mostly the organic molecules that do not dissociate in water. Examples of this will be your glucose, lipids, creatinine, and urea, where no charged particles are actually created. On the other hand, electrolytes would dissociate into ions in the water. For example, the inorganic salts, like your sodium chloride, will dissociate in the positive ion sodium and the negative ion chloride. All acids and bases, also some proteins made up of ions, which conduct electrical current and have a greater osmotic power than non-electrolytes. They have a greater ability to cause fluid shifts due to their ability to dissociate into two or more ions. For instance, your sodium chloride I mentioned can dissociate into positive sodium and negative chloride ions. And therefore, as an electrolyte is made up of sodium and chloride, there are already two separate particles. Magnesium and magnesium chloride will be the same thing. You will have magnesium ion plus 2 chloride. So you are actually looking at 3 particles with the magnesium chloride alone. and the glucose is actually made up only of one particle and is a non-electrolyte. So electrolyte concentrations are expressed in milliequivalents, and milliequivalents are just like our measure of electrical charges per liter of solution. For single charged ions, such as sodium, 1 milliequivalent is equal to 1 milliosmol. And for bivalent ions, such as your calcium, okay, calcium is actually bivalent, 1 milliequivalent is 1/2 of milliosmol. 1 milliequivalent of either of these provide same amount of charge. So let's take a look at the balance between fluid compartments, the comparison of the extracellular and the intercellular fluid compartments. Now, the volume of fluid in each is actually kept constant in each of the compartment. Since water follows electrolyte, they must be imbalanced as well. Only two places for exchange is actually happening between compartments. The cell membranes separate the intracellular from the interstitial fluid, and only in capillaries are the walls thin enough for exchange between the plasma and interstitial fluids. Now, each fluid compartment is very distinct. For instance, your extracellular fluid, that's your extracellular fluid, the electrolyte contents of this are all similar except for higher proteins, and there's lower chloride content of the plasma. The major cation in the extracellular is, well, it doesn't say here in the picture, but the major cation is actually sodium, okay? And the major anion is actually the chloride. In the intracellular, the ICF, they contain more soluble proteins than the plasma. There's low sodium and low chloride. The major cation in the intracellular is actually your major anion is actually your phosphate, okay, the hydrophosphates. The electrolytes are the most abundant solutes in the body fluids, and they determine most chemical and physical reactions. The bulk of the solved solute take up most of the space. They consist of proteins, phospholipids, cholesterol, and triglycerides. Now, 90% of these dissolved substances are actually in the plasma, and 60% in the interstitial fluid, and 97% in the intercellular fluid. Let's take a look at the exchange of gases, nutrients, water, and waste between the three fluid compartments. So take note that osmotic and hydrostatic pressure regulate the continuous exchange and mixing of fluids. So the osmotic pressure is actually the ones that's created by the proteins. These are the pooling pressure that retains water. The osmotic pressure is much like likened to your sponge. If you have a sponge, your sponge is the protein. You put it, let's say, in a wet spot, and that sponge is going to suck up all of the water. The osmotic pressure is just like that. Your proteins, you put it in a wet spot, it will act like a sponge. It's going to suck up all of that water and retain it right there. So the osmotic pressure and the hydrostatic pressure would regulate the continuous exchange and mixing of fluids. And water moves freely along the osmotic gradients. And all body fluids osmolality is almost always equal. A change in the solute concentration of any of the compartment would lead to net water flow. An increase in the extracellular an increase in the extracellular, let's say extracellular osmolality, will pretty much result in water leaving the cell. A decrease in extracellular osmolality will result in water entering the cell. So exchanges between the plasma and the interstitial fluid occurs across the capillary walls. It's usually like occurring along the capillary walls. And this is your blood, okay? This is your, what do you call this, the interstitial fluid. And pretty much wherever the capillary wall is, that's where the exchange is actually happening. Fluid, okay, the exchanges between the plasma and the interstitial fluid occur across the capillary wall. I said that already. And the fluid leaks from the arteriolar end of the capillary and then reabsorbed at the venular end. And the lymphatics pick up the remaining fluid and returns it to the blood. Exchanges between your interstitial fluid and intracellular fluid would occur across the cell membrane. The two-way osmotic, there's actually a two-way osmotic flow of water. Ions move selectively into or out of the cell. Nutrients, waste, and gases have a unidirectional flow. Once they're in, they're in. Once they're out, they're out. So, water intake. Water intake must equal water output. Okay, so this is the average intake of water per day and the average output of water per day, which means whatever you take for that particular day, let's say you have beverages that's equivalent to about 1,500 ml, food, water in the food, 750 ml, and then your metabolic water, about 250 ml. You pretty much, that will be your intake. Now, your average output would pretty much like be equal, okay? The total of this is actually 250 ml. That's your intake. Your outtake will be roughly about 250 ml, okay? Your 100 ml is actually getting into your feces. 200 ml is actually in the sweat. 700 ml will be the insensible loss via the skin, the lung, and the lungs. And then about 1,500 ml is lost in the urine, about 60%, which is actually lost in the urine. That's actually your average output per day. If you have more output because you sweat too much, okay? If this is beyond 2,500 that you lost for the day, that will eventually make you dehydrated. And all of the homeostatic mechanism to offset that dehydration or that feeling of dehydration will happen. The hypothalamus is going to pretty much send stimulus and will make you thirsty. Okay, the seat of hydration and the seat of what do you call this, eating and taking in water is actually in the hypothalamus. So this is the one that would tell you if you are thirsty and you have to drink water. So that means only one thing. Water intake must equal water output with an average of about standard 2,500 ml per day. So the thirst mechanism pretty much for regulating water intake is actually, let's say there's an increase in extracellular osmolality. What's going to happen is that there are osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus that's pretty much going to send stimulus to the hypothalamic thirst center. Okay, your saliva, the content of your saliva is going down. You're experiencing dry mouth. These are all going to be felt by the hypothalamus, and it's going to be delivered to the hypothalamic thirst center. And there's going to be a sensation of thirst, and so the person must take a drink. Okay, water moistens the throat, the mouth, stretches the stomach and the intestine. And then again, it gives a reversed signal to the hypothalamus, hey, we're done. We don't need to drink anymore because you don't want to overhydrate yourself. It's not good also. So water then, the right amount of water now is absorbed from the GI tract. And that now is going to reverse your increased ECF or extracellular fluid osmolarity, it's going to bring it down and it will bring up your plasma volume because now you have taken in a lot of water and you're not thirsty anymore. Okay. And the same thing, not looking at the osmolality, you're looking at the plasma volume, the same thing will happen. A decrease in plasma volume, a decrease in blood pressure, pretty much the granular cells in the kidney will act on the renin and angiotensin aldosterone mechanism. It will release the production of angiotensin too, and eventually it will go down, setting signals to the hypothalamus all the way down until you're going to be taking in just enough water to pretty much like quench your thirst. Okay, so thirst is the driving force of water, and intake is governed by this hypothalamic thirst center, and the hypothalamic osmoreceptors would detect the extracellular osmolality and is activated by increased plasma osmolality, dry mouth, decreased blood volume or pressure, or angiotensin 2 or baroreceptor inputs. And drinking water would eventually inhibit the inhibitory feedback center, and so that will give relief to your thirst. So let's take a look at regulation of water output. First of all, there is such a thing as obligatory water losses. Okay, this will explain why we cannot live without water very long. Okay, so this will include insensible water loss from the lungs or the skin. Okay, insensible is in a way that why do I need to lose it? Well, you cannot do anything about it. When you are breathing through your lungs, you are actually losing water through your breath. Okay, and you are sweating. Okay, call it what it may, insensibly, but it happens. Okay, so sensible water loss is actually loss of water through the urine. Really, you need to really lose that water because this is actually the water that where the waste like is actually going to be like um, in solution with, in order for you to eliminate that. About 60% of that will be waste, and then some obvious sweat, which is 8%, and the feces, which is 4%. These are the sensible water loss. The volume of urine excreted and solute concentration also depend on fluid intake, diet, as well as water loss, either um, um, via other avenues. Okay, so um, we can take another mechanism, which is the consequences that would happen through ADH release. This is another mechanism of and consequences of the movement of water through the antidiuretic hormone. Okay, so water absorption in the collecting ducts, okay, is proportional, usually always proportional to the antidiuretic hormone release. Decreased antidiuretic hormone leads to a dilute urine and drop in the volume of body fluids. So you're going to lose a little bit of urine volume there because of decreased ADH. Increased ADH, on the other hand, leads to concentrated urine due to reabsorption of water, increased reabsorption of water by the ADH, causing increased volume of fluids. Now, the hypothalamic osmoreceptors could sense the ECF solute concentration and could therefore regulate the ADH the release of ADH accordingly. Okay, so having said all that, what could be some results of um, uneven water balance? I mean, loss of water balance. For instance, dehydration itself. Okay, um, there are three abnormalities of water balance. The first one is called what you call dehydration. And with dehydration, the extracellular fluid water loss, it could be due to hemorrhage, severe burns, prolonged vomiting or diarrhea, profuse sweating. Yeah, you can dehydrate because you've been working hard there and you're not drinking water and you are depriving yourself water. So water deprivation can cause dehydration. Diuretic abuse. Okay, you're taking a diuretic and you want to lose that water in order to lower your blood pressure. You're abusing it. Okay, and endocrine disturbances also. Um, so what are the signs and symptoms of dehydration? First one is what you call uh, cottony mouth, which means you become thirsty and your saliva becomes like bubbly, and cottony. That means you are dehydrated and you're not drinking throughout the entire night or the entire day. And dry, flushed skin and oliguria. You're not going to the bathroom to relieve yourself. That's after it's because there's no water to come out to be released. Okay, it may lead to weight loss, fever, mental confusion, hypovolemic shock, and also the loss of electrolytes. Okay, so pretty much most of the things that I mentioned is actually right here. And I don't think I mentioned fatigue. It's a critical symptom. It puts you at risk on sight, affecting your ability to concentrate. So if you're working outside in the middle of the heat of the sun and you feel tired, stop what you're doing, get into a place where it's actually cooler, get a drink of water, okay? Let yourself sweat, okay? Relieve your thirst. Do not pretty much like overthink of anything else that you need to follow something or you need to pretty much finish what you're working on. Think of yourself, because if you're not going to think of yourself and you drop right there and you lose consciousness right there, none of the work is going to be done anyway. So let's take a look at the disturbances in water balance. Okay, so number one, disturbances could be because of excessive loss of water from the extracellular fluid. Actually, like we're talking here now of the consequences of dehydration. If more water than the solute is lost, remember this, then the cells will shrink. Now, this excessive loss of water from the extracellular fluid will result in the extracellular osmotic pressure rising. And then uh, in the cells itself, the cells lose water due to the extracellular water. The cells lose the water to the extracellular fluid via osmosis. And therefore, what's going to happen to the cell? The cells will shrink. It looks like this cell really is shrinking. So this is actually one consequence of dehydration. If more water than solute is lost, then the cells will shrink. And right here, you have three different cells. And I'm pretty sure you've seen this already in your biology class when your teacher is asking you what happens to the red blood cells when they are placed in a isotonic environment or an environment that is equal to the solute concentration of the cell itself. It stays happy. If it is shaped like biconcave, it stays like biconcave. It's not going to change its shape. It's not going to lose water. It's not going to gain water. But you put that cell in a hypotonic solution where there's a lot of water, you're hydrating it too much, it picks up the water because it has salt inside it. It picks up more water than it should, and it will become swollen. If this will not stop, this swelling could make the red blood cell burst. Okay? Or it can go into lysis. Now, if you put it in a salty environment, an environment that would have high solute content, then your red blood cell will shrink. It will lose water. Okay? It will undergo what you call crenation. Okay? And this is because it is dehydrated. It will lose the water. So, hypotonic hydration, okay, refers to cellular overhydration or water intoxication. It occurs with renal insufficiency or rapid excess water ingestion. And the extracellular fluid osmolality would decrease, causing hyponatremia. And natremia is actually the content of sodium. Hypo means low, so low sodium content. It results in net osmosis of water into the tissue cells and results in the swellings of the cells. The symptoms of this would be severe metabolic disturbance, nausea, vomiting, muscular cramping, cerebral edema, and possibly death. That's not good. And usually, before that thing happens, you treat it with hypertonic saline. So now, let's take a look at, again, the other phase of disturbances in water balance, where looking at the consequences of hypotonic hydration, which is water gain. If more water than solute is gained, the cells will swell. And I mentioned that to you. The cell will undergo edema. And this is where if there's excessive water that's entering the extracellular fluid, the extracellular fluid osmotic pressure will fall, leading to the water moving into the cells by osmosis, making the cells swell. So here you're overhydrating the cells. So now we can look at edema. Edema is swelling itself, not only swelling of the cell, but swelling of an entire organ. Okay? Swelling due to excess fluid that is in that particular organ or that particular structure. It is an atypical accumulation of interstitial fluid resulting in tissue swelling, not the cell swelling, but the tissue, meaning a group of cells. Now, only the volume of interstitial fluid is increased here, not the other compartments. Edema can impair tissue function by increasing distance of diffusion of oxygen and nutrients from the blood into the cells. And edema could be caused by increased fluid flow out of the blood or decreased return of fluid to the blood. Okay, electrolyte balance. Okay, let's take a look at how the body reacts to pretty much electrolyte balance. Okay, before I get into this picture, let me discuss to you what electrolyte balance is. It usually refers to only to the salt balance because the main electrolyte is actually salt. It refers only to the salt balance, even though electrolytes also include acids and bases and some proteins. Now, salts control fluid movements. They provide minerals for excitability, for secretory activity, and membrane permeability. Salts enter the body by ingestion and we also produce this by metabolism and are lost via perspiration, our sweat, our feces also, and our urine, as well as when we vomit. Oops. and I did not have the chance to do that, and I cannot go back. Okay, I can actually discuss that when we get into the aldosterone system. So here's actually the consequences of electrolyte imbalance. It's table 26.1. You can see this table 26.1 also in your textbook. So you get into your ebooks. Whenever I show you some tables, guys, the table is a very good um, review material. It'll give you almost all of the information that I have already finished discussing up to that point. And here's another table, causes and consequences of electrolyte imbalance, which is pretty much what I have just mentioned to you. Okay, what are the different types of electrolyte imbalances? Well, it depends on what kind of electrolyte you're going to be missing. There's actually sodium, there's also potassium, there's also calcium. Now, sodium is actually the most abundant cation in the extracellular fluid. Sodium salts in the extracellular fluid contribute about 200 milliosmoles of a total 300 milliosmoles extracellular fluid solute concentration. It is the only cation that is exerting significant osmotic pressure, and it controls the extracellular fluid volume and water distribution because, like what I mentioned to you, whatever sodium is, water follows. So whatever you have sodium, you're going to have plenty of water. Changes in the sodium levels affect plasma volume, therefore, and blood pressure, and the extracellular fluid if the interstitial fluid volume, and extracellular fluid volumes as well. Now, sodium that leaks into the cells is pumped out against its electrochemical gradient. Sodium moves back and forth between the extracellular fluid and the body secretions. For instance, an example of this will be our digestive secretions. The renal acid-base control mechanisms are coupled to the sodium ion transport. Sodium pump uses ATP, and therefore the movement of sodium can actually be using a lot of energy. So, several severe electrolyte deficiencies, therefore, may prompt craving for salty or sour foods. Example will be smoked meats or pickled eggs, pickled vegetable, okay? And a lot of women who are actually, like, especially in our country, there's actually an old belief that a woman, once she gets pregnant, will always be craving for something. Well, most of the time, the reason for the craving of a person, whether you are pregnant or not, is because of uh, electrolyte deficiencies. Okay, among pregnant women, the change in the hormones, the hormonal mechanism of her body during her pregnancy, and the growing fetus would affect her electrolyte balance, and therefore she can think of I need something salty. I want something like uh, pickle this and pickle that, and it's and they say, or at least in our country, whatever it is that you had craving for, your baby would look like that. Well, none of my baby looked like a pickled cucumber anyway, but I really crave for pickled cucumber when I was pregnant. So this particular craving is common with some people who are suffering from Addison's disease. It's a disorder in which too little aldosterone is produced by the adrenal cortex. Pica, P-I-C-A, is a disorder where a person may eat substances such as chalk, clay, starch, or burnt match tips. Ooh. And this is caused by a deficiency in minerals such as iron. And whoa, that is really bad. Okay, I have never known a person with a pica disorder yet. So here is actually uh, a table showing you the sodium concentration and sodium content. Sodium concentration versus sodium content. Is there a difference? Okay, the concentration of sodium, it's right there here in this particular column, remains stable because of water shifts out of or into the intracellular fluid. It determines osmolality of the extracellular fluid, and it influences excitability of neurons and muscles. The total body content of, here you go, total body content of sodium would determine the extracellular fluid volume and therefore blood pressure. There are no known receptors that monitor the sodium levels in body fluids. Sodium water, the sodium water balance is linked to blood pressure and blood volume control mechanisms. So changes in blood pressure or volume would trigger neural as well as hormonal controls to regulate sodium content. Now, right here, the antidiuretic hormone and thirst are also required to maintain blood volume for the long-term control of blood pressure. So pretty much these two is actually helping in controlling and in balancing blood pressure. There you go. We're back to that thing that I missed. So we can actually discuss it. So let's take a look at the mechanisms and consequences of aldosterone release. I was just going to do that. It's a good thing I did not discuss that. I missed that by clicking too fast. I have it. I knew I have it in another page, which is this page here. We're looking at the influence of aldosterone and angiotensin. Aldosterone plays the biggest role in the regulation of sodium ion by the kidneys. Regardless of aldosterone presence, 65% of sodium is absorbed in the proximal convoluted tubules, and 25% is reclaimed in the loops of Henle. Sodium is never secreted into the filtrate. Okay, let's take a look at the flow chart before I make a mistake of clicking and again I lose this thing here. Let's take a look at what happens if the body's sodium content pretty much goes down. Okay, the body sodium content goes down, and that particular incident would trigger the renin release. Renin is a hormone, okay, and this is actually released by the cells of the kidneys. This would pretty much increase angiotensin 2. So this will, the effect of this is actually to stimulate the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone. Then aldosterone is going to hit the kidney tubules. Pretty much, it's going to um, um, stimulate the conversion of angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2, okay? And so the effect will be angiotensin 2 will be increasing sodium reabsorption. Aldosterone and angiotensin 2 will increase sodium reabsorption, pretty much, which will restore the homeostatic plasma levels of sodium and potassium. It will now be it will elevate it a little bit so that it will be back to normal. In the same token, your increased potassium concentration in the ECF will also be stimulating the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone, and in the kidneys, the effect of that will be to increase potassium secretion, and that would eventually bring back as a homeostatic balance the plasma levels of potassium. So, in a nutshell, your aldosterone and angiotensin 2 really plays a major role in the balance of sodium and potassium. Sodium is actively reabsorbed in the distal convoluted tubule, and and water will follow in after sodium. So the extracellular fluid volume would increase. When aldosterone concentrations are low, and sodium is not actively reabsorbed and is lost to the urine, along with increased loss of water through the renin angiotensin aldosterone mechanism. And this mechanism is the main trigger for aldosterone release. The granular cells of the juxtaglomerular cells secrete renin in response to the sympathetic nervous system stimulation, the decreased filtrate sodium chloride, and decreased stretch of granular cells due to decreased blood pressure. Ooh, look at this. This woman here has Addison's disease. This is just a cartoon. A real person with Addison's disease would really look much, much worse than this woman here, and would really have a humped back, most like a whale, like a whale would have a humpback. That's actually what it does to people who have Addison's disease. So, people with Addison's disease, or otherwise known as hypoaldosteronism, do not produce aldosterone, so they lose tremendous amount of sodium chloride and water to the urine. They are perpetually at risk of hypovolemia or low blood volume for as long as they ingest, but for as long as they ingest adequate amounts of salt and fluids every day, they can avoid problems associated with sodium balance. So pretty much that's not going to be a problem, but it is a problem. A lot of people uh, pretty much like forget that they should actually be doing that, most especially if they had developed it and during their childhood they never had Addison's disease, and if they just developed it, they have to get used to the fact that they need to they need to maintain their salt balance, which is really not easy. It's just like taking medication, but this time your medication is too much salt. All right, so let's take a look at the regulation of sodium balance. I have here I have here the heart. Well, because this is actually something to do with the atrial natriuretic peptide, which is produced by the atrium of the heart. They are released by the atrial cells in response to stretch caused by increased blood pressure. The effects will be they decrease blood pressure. Of all the hormones that I mentioned to you that affect blood pressure, such as aldosterone, the angiotensin 1, angiotensin 2, okay? These are all increasing blood pressure. Only one among all of this will be doing the opposite of what this renin angiotensin system will do, and that is the atrial natriuretic peptide. It will decrease blood pressure and blood volume. That's the effect of it. It inhibits the ADH, the renin and aldosterone production. It increases the excretion of sodium and water. It promotes vasodilation directly and also by decreasing the production of angiotensin too. So it pretty much like goes against the actions of the renin angiotensin and ADH hormones. Then you have the influence of other hormones. Pretty much, there are other hormones that influence sodium balance. The female sex hormones is one of them. Estrogen, increased salt reabsorption. There, it's like aldosterone, and it leads to water retention during the menstrual cycles and pregnancy. And I'm pretty sure the ladies would agree to this that when they are like a little, like even a few hours before they have their period or when they're having their period, they feel bloated. They feel that they have taken in too much water and they're not eliminating it. So it's because of increased salt reabsorption, and so it results in reabsorption or water. Water is actually like being taken in, and they feel bloated. The next one is your progesterone. Progesterone is a hormone of pregnancy. It becomes a little bit, it we produce it more, most especially when we are really positively pregnant. It decreases sodium reabsorption though, and it blocks aldosterone. It promotes sodium and water loss. And the third, the next hormone besides the female hormone to affect sodium balance is glucocorticoids. This is actually a hormone that is produced by the adrenal glands. There's actually the glucocorticoids would increase sodium reabsorption and they can promote edema. Okay. Right here is something that we can or we may not, because I would like to do this together with our chapter on the hormones, which is the is it the renin, angiotensin, and antidiuretic hormone? Yeah, I have already discussed with you, like in the blood vessels and now in the kidneys, and I'm still going to be discussing the renin angiotensin system again when we get into that in the hormones. Just know that when there is a systemic blood pressure, what's going to increase the blood pressure? The ones that increases the blood pressure and is actually those substances that will whose effects will be the reverse of a decrease in blood pressure. The reverse of that will be your increasing in blood volume and blood pressure. That will be your angiotensin, which is going to be converted into angiotensin 1. Okay, well, first of all, how do you release angiotensinogen? How do you release angiotensin 1? Well, your angiotensinogen is actually produced in the liver. They are produced in the liver, and the renin is a hormone that is actually secreted by the granular cells of the kidney. And this is actually going to be produced in response to a stimulus that's actually like a stretch in the afferent arterioles, a decrease in the stretch in the afferent arteriole because of decreased systemic blood volume, a decrease in the filtrate concentration. So the granular cells is actually like feeling the decrease in blood pressure because of this too. Now it's going to prod the release of renin, or now it's going to be stimulated to release renin. Renin now is going to catalyze the conversion of angiotensinogen into an active form angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is now going to be converted into angiotensin 2 by the angiotensin converting enzyme, ACE. That's actually released by the cells of the lungs. Once you have angiotensin 2, the angiotensin 2 is now going to act on the systemic arterioles. It will make the systemic arterioles constrict. It results in vasoconstriction and an increase in peripheral resistance, which will pretty much result in an increase in blood pressure, which is the reverse of what the original stimulus was. Or it can act on the adrenal cortex and it will release aldosterone. Aldosterone acts on the distal kidney tubules and it causes the increased sodium and water reabsorption. It will increase blood volume as well as increasing blood pressure. Or putting it in the other way around, okay, a decrease in systemic blood pressure would inhibit the baroreceptors in the blood vessels. It will increase sympathetic nervous system activity, and then the sympathetic arterioles will cause vasoconstriction, resulting in increased peripheral resistance. All of this pretty much is also augmented by the action of the posterior pituitary that would actually be helping in regulating the blood pressure by secreting antidiuretic hormone. And the antidiuretic hormone is going to be secreted by the collecting ducts of the kidneys, resulting in water reabsorption. All of this will eventually increase blood pressure, reversing uh, the original, um, um, the original systemic blood pressure, decrease in systemic blood pressure. Now we leave the sodium balance. We're now going to go to the potassium balance. Potassium is mostly inside the cell and is essential for the function of excitable tissues. And you have internal, you have right here the internal potassium balance and external potassium balance. And how important could that be? Well, internally, it's actually like affecting the resting membrane potential in the neurons, in the muscle cells, especially in the cardiac muscle. It also increases, potassium also increases in the extracellular fluid. And when you have an overly high um, potassium in the extracellular fluid, you have a situation which you call hyperkalemia. And this one would cause in a decrease of resting membrane potential, which causes depolarization followed by excitability. That's why too much potassium is good for the heart muscle, but too much of it is also going to increase the resting membrane potential, which can cause excitability in the heart muscle cells. You don't want too much of it also. Now, a decrease in the extracellular fluid pretty much will result in hypokalemia. It causes hyperpolarization and non-responsiveness. Now, a disruption in the potassium, which could either be hyper or hypokalemia in the heart, just like what I mentioned to you, can interfere with the normal electrical conduction, leading to, if we are not really, we're not really um, if we're not really careful, is actually going to lead to sudden death. Potassium is also part of the body's buffer system, and it the hydrogen ion shifts in and out of the cells in the opposite direction of potassium to maintain cation or positive ion balance. The extracellular potassium levels would rise in acidosis, and the extracellular fluid potassium level would rather fall in alkalosis. So it rises with acidosis, it falls with alkalosis. And potassium interferes with excitability of cells because of this behavior. So I mentioned to you what happens to potassium in different parts of the kidney. Okay, so um, in the glomerulus, potassium is freely filtered, and right in the proximal convoluted tubule, it's reabsorbed. Okay, pretty much 2/3 of its concentration. In the loop of Henle, 25% is actually reabsorbed, right? Um, 25% of the filtered potassium is reabsorbed. Then in the distal convoluted tubule, um, normal or high, there's actually normal or high potassium, uh, but we secrete 10 to 50% of the filtered potassium. In low potassium, you can reabsorb 3% of the filtered potassium. And in the collecting duct, normal with normal or high potassium, we secrete 5 to 30% of the filtered potassium. With low potassium, we reabsorb 10% of the filtered potassium, and that's actually through homeostasis. So the main regulatory site of potassium balance is actually controlled in the cortical collecting ducts by regulating amounts that is secreted into the filtrate. High potassium, high potassium content on the extracellular fluid would favor the principal cell secretion of potassium. Now, low potassium levels would cause the principal cells to reduce the secretion of potassium to a minimum. Also, we have also the intercalated cells, which we call the type A intercalated cells. They can reabsorb some potassium that is left in a filtrate. The kidneys have limited ability to retain potassium, so most potassium is lost in the urine and may lead to deficiency if not replaced in the diet. And this is the reason why we are urged really to eat uh, just moderate, um, just enough bananas, because bananas are rich in potassium. I would not really suggest for you to be eating too much of bananas, simply because bananas are also very rich in sugar. So it's rather difficult really to decide which way you want to go. You want to get the potassium with the bananas, you're also getting its sugar, which is really high in. Now let's take a look at the role of the parathyroid hormone on the bone, the kidneys, and the intestine. Okay, in this token here, we are going to discuss the role of calcium and phosphate, because pretty much the parathyroid gland is actually responsible for the absorption of calcium. 99% of the body's calcium is found in the bones as calcium phosphate and salts of calcium phosphate. Calcium balance is controlled by, on the other hand, is controlled by the parathyroid hormone and rarely deviates from the normal limits. The parathyroid hormone promotes increase in calcium level by targeting the bones. And I hear the osteoclast, okay, breaks down the matrix, releasing the calcium and the phosphates to the blood. The kidneys increases calcium reabsorption. It decreases phosphate ion reabsorption. In the small intestine increases calcium absorption indirectly through the stimulation of the kidneys to activate vitamin D precursor. 98% of the filtered calcium is reabsorbed and is due to the parathyroid hormone. If the extracellular fluid calcium levels are normal, the parathyroid hormone is inhibited. Now, 75% of filtered phosphates are reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule, and the parathyroid hormone inhibits this by decreasing uh, the TM of the phosphate. And the reabsorption of phosphate is also affected by insulin. Actually, it increases the reabsorption of insulin. And glucagon, it decreases the absorption of glucagon. Now, hypocalcemia. This is now a homeostatic disease. Okay, hypocalcemia means low blood calcium, lower than what is supposed to be. Hypocalcemia increases neuromuscular excitability and can lead to muscle tetany. Hypercalcemia, meaning too much calcium in the blood, would inhibit neurons and muscle cells and may cause heart arrhythmia. So the blood calcium level should just be maintained at its optimum. It cannot be too high, it cannot be too low. But if the blood calcium is too high anyway, the osteoblastic activity of the bone is going to be stimulated and the osteoblast will build your bone. That's actually the good part in it. But when the calcium level is too low, then you would need to uh, slow down the osteoclast in their um, in their digestion of the bone materials. Oh, what did I say? If the calcium level is low, you will need calcium. Then you need to excite you will need to excite the osteoclast in some other aspects of your body where it can actually remodel the bone. And when it's remodeling the bone, it's actually releasing calcium in the bone and some parts that's going to elevate the calcium in the blood. Or you take calcium as a supplement. It's always calcium is a very important um, is a very important ion, cation. Calcium is used not only in building bones. Calcium is used um, as a cofactor in enzymatic action and pretty much in blood clotting and in most enzymatic action in the body. Calcium is always being used. Calcium is very important. That's why the body needs to have a storage of calcium. And that's the reason why we have our bones. Our bones is actually our storage of calcium. When the body needs the action of calcium and it is actually needing it too much, the bone will need to release some of its calcium at the expense of the bone. They will have to do it because calcium is very important in a lot of metabolic activity. It's a cofactor, it's a coenzyme in metabolic activities. So here's a picture of your acid base. What happens to acid base imbalance? Well, take note that you know that pH affects all functional proteins and biochemical reactions. And the normal pH of body fluids is actually within 7.35 to 7.45. Matter of fact, your arterial blood is 7.4, the venous blood is 7.35, the intracellular fluid is about 7. Beautiful. So, the word alkalosis or alkalemia would mean that the arterial pH has gone up to something that is higher than the normal. It is now higher than 7.45. So, higher than this, you are experiencing or we are experiencing alkalosis. Lower than that, our blood is acidosis. Acidosis or acidemia is where the pH of the blood is lower than 7.35. So let's take a look at regulation of the negatively charged ions. We're now finished with the main cation, which is calcium. And we mentioned a little bit about potassium, which is also a cation. Now let's take a look at the anions. Uh, take note that the cations in the body is not only potassium and calcium, but I only discuss a lot on the potassium and calcium because these are the main cations. Take note that in your readings, you will stumble on other cations. Just read through them, guys. You might stumble them as part of the questions, so you will understand them. Now let's take a look at the negatively charged ions, which we call the anions. Now, the concentration of hydrogen ion is regulated sequentially by three mechanisms. You have the chemical buffer system, which is a rapid first line of defense. You have also the brainstem. Here you have the brainstem respiratory center that is going to act within 1 to 3 minutes. That's in the chemical buffer. The next one is what you call the renal mechanism. The renal mechanism is the most potent, but would require hours or even days for the effect on the change in pH. Okay, so the bicarbonate, the bicarbonates is actually the main ion that we encounter in our blood. Its main role is to maintain the body's acid-base balance through the buffer system. And the phosphate is a major constituent of the intracellular fluid, and it is important in the regulation of metabolic process as a buffering agent in animals. First of all, guys, I would like to make mention, what is a buffer? I've been mentioning buffer, I think, for several minutes now. A buffer is a substance that would resist a change, a dramatic change in the pH. So if you have a buffering system in the body, um, pretty much if you add strong acid to this buffering system, it will not immediately acidify that particular environment. It will prevent that environment from becoming too acidic because of the buffer, and uh, that will pretty much like release your cells from the danger, or that will save your cells from the danger of being exposed to too much acidity. Or if it's the other way around, if the environment becomes too basic, the buffers actually will neutralize that too much basic environment in order to prevent the cells from suffering from too much basic environment. So that's pretty much like in a nutshell what a buffer is. It resists a change in pH, whether you're talking about a very acidic or very basic pH. A buffer does that. And a phosphate is a major constituent of the intercellular fluid and is important in the regulation of the metabolic process as a buffering agent in animal cells, most especially in humans. The kidneys regulate the salt balance in the body by controlling the excretion and reabsorption of various ions, most especially salt. The chloride is needed to maintain proper hydration, as well as to balance the cations and maintain the electrical neutrality of the extracellular fluid. Chloride ion is a major anion accompanying sodium in the extracellular fluid. It helps maintain osmotic pressure in the blood. 99% of the chloride is reabsorbed under normal pH. Now, when acidosis occur, fewer chloride ions are reabsorbed in lieu of the bicarbonate, the carbonates. So, in the acid-base balance, the concentration of hydrogen ions is sequentially is regulated sequentially by three mechanisms. Your chemical buffer system, which is very fast, it's a very fast line of defense in order to pretty much rapidly assist in a change of acidity of the system itself. The brainstem respiratory center, it acts within 1 to 3 minutes, and the renal system is slow, but it's the most potent. It requires several hours to days to affect the change in pH. Chemical buffer is it pretty much means that there is a variety of chemicals in the body fluids that prevent the fluids from undergoing large changes in the pH. These chemical buffers um, would regulate fluctuating hydrogen ion concentrations. The chemical buffers would bind to the hydrogen ion when there are too many of these hydrogen ion, so the pH remains normal. Uh, the chemical buffers also release hydrogen ions when there are too few in a solution, so the pH remains normal. The chemical buffer systems would include the protein system, the phosphate system, and the carbonic acid bicarbonate system. So the chemical buffer is a system using one or more compounds that would act together to resist a change in pH when a strong acid or base is actually added. It will bind hydrogen ion if the pH drops, just like what I mentioned, or release hydrogen ion if the pH would rise. And just like what I mentioned, there are three of them. You have your bicarbonate buffering system, okay? You have the phosphate system, and you have the protein buffer system. So again, in the chemical buffer system, when there is a decrease in hydrogen ion, and there's a decrease in hydrogen ion, um, carbonic acid, this is your carbonic acid. Okay, when there's a decrease in hydrogen ion, carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. Conversely, when there is excess hydrogen ions, they combine with bicarbonate, because this is actually going to be the other way around, okay, so it's reversible. The bicarbonate combines with the hydrogen ion in the blood to form back the carbonic acid. The carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system is an essential physiological mechanism that helps maintain pH balance in the human body. The respiratory system and the kidneys play crucial roles in regulating the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system. The respiratory system controls the release of carbon dioxide from the body through breathing. Okay, and let me see. Okay, right here, if a strong acid is added to bicarbonate, it ties up with the hydrogen ion and forms by the bicarbonate. I mentioned that already. And hydrochloric acid plus your weak base will form a weak acid plus salt. This is actually how the buffering system would happen. And if a strong base, and on the other hand, if a strong base is added, it causes the bicarbonate to dissociate and would donate the hydrogen ion. This is where your strong base, sodium hydroxide, plus your weak acid will form a weak base plus water. This is actually how it does its buffering system. So, the kidneys regulate the levels of bicarbonate ions in the blood, okay, by absorbing or excreting them based on the body's needs. The bicarbonate buffer system, okay, is a mixture of the weak acid and salt. So this is actually your weak acid and strong base, the bicarb forming a weak base. I mentioned that already. Okay, and it buffers both the this thing happens in the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid, but is only important in the extracellular buffering system. Now, the strong acid and the weak base, this particular instant, this particular reaction right here, pretty much here the pH would decrease only slightly unless the available bicarbonate is actually consumed, alkaline, which through the alkaline reserve. And the bicarbonate is closely regulated by the kidneys. Here is a quick summary of the chemical buffer system. I would like you to go through them and go through whatever we have already mentioned. Okay, the bicarbonate buffer system, the phosphate buffer system, and the protein buffer system. Guys, really, this is really highly, it requires a knowledge of chemistry, and I'm hoping your inorganic chemistry is very strong because you need really to understand this in your next exam. Okay, let's now go to the respiratory regulation of hydrogen ion. Respiratory and renal systems are physiological buffering systems. They act more slowly than the chemical buffer system, but they have more buffering power. The respiratory system eliminates carbon dioxide, which happens to be like an acid, and there is a reversible equilibrium that exists in the blood. Carbon dioxide plus water becomes carbonic acid. That's why we say carbon dioxide is acidic, because the moment it is in the blood, it becomes carbonic acid. Now, during the carbon dioxide unloading, this reaction shifts to the left, and hydrogen ion is incorporated into the water, forming an acidic water. Now, during the loading of carbon dioxide, the reaction shifts to the right, and the hydrogen ion is buffered by proteins. The respiratory system impairment when you have something wrong with your respiratory system, it would cause this acid base, it would cause acid base imbalances. Now, hypoventilation causes respiratory acidosis, and hyperventilation can rapidly cause respiratory alkalosis. Let's take a look at the acid-base physiology by the kidneys. The kidneys eliminate non-volatile, meaning fixed, acids that are produced by cellular metabolism, like phosphoric acid, uric acid, lactic acid, and ketones. And this is actually to prevent metabolic acidosis. The kidneys also regulate blood levels of alkaline substances. They renew chemical buffers. The kidneys regulate acid-base balance by adjusting the amount of bicarbonate in the blood, either by conserving, like reabsorbing, or generating new bicarbonates, excreting bicarbonates. Remember that generating or reabsorbing one bicarbonate is the same as losing one hydrogen ion. So let's let's take a quick peek into conserving filtered bicarbonate ions by through bicarbonate reabsorption. Now, in the case of bicarbonates, the primary buffer system is in the body, okay, is actually this. The bicarbonates is the primary buffer system. It is continually reabsorbed by the kidneys in exchange for producing acidic urine. Hydrogen ion is actively, there's your hydrogen ion right there. Your hydrogen ion is actively secreted into the lumen, into the tubular lumen, forming bicarbonate, then carbon dioxide, then water. The carbon dioxide then diffuses back. The carbon dioxide diffuses back into the tubule, recombining with water to form H2CO3. And then the hydrogen ion and bicarbonates separately. The bicarbonate passes back into the blood. Bicarbonates passes back into the blood. There's your bicarbonate right there, into the blood. While the bloodstream wills the hydrogen ion, there you go, is actually actively passed back into the lumen. In effect, it is the active excretion of hydrogen ion in the kidney that facilitates the bicarbonate reabsorption. Metabolism of food generates new hydrogen ion, which must be balanced by generating new bicarbonates. Secreted hydrogen ion used to reclaim filtered bicarbonate is not really excreted from the body. It is incorporated into a water molecule, which is actually reabsorbed. So the body has the same number of bicarbonates and hydrogen ion as it started out, with no net loss or gain. Okay, let's take a look at, made a mistake right here. That's respiratory alkalosis, and this is metabolic alkalosis. Abnormalities of acid-base balance. Alkalosis. You have two types of alkalosis: respiratory alkalosis and metabolic alkalosis. So all imbalances are classed either as respiratory or metabolic. You can have respiratory acidosis and alkalosis. You have metabolic acidosis and alkalosis. So respiratory acidosis and alkalosis is caused by failure of the respiratory system to perform a pH balancing role. This is actually the single most important indicator of the blood carbon dioxide pressure. Metabolic acidosis and alkalosis is pretty much the rest of the other abnormalities that is caused by abnormalities in the pressure of carbon dioxide levels in the blood. and is indicated by abnormal bicarbonate levels. So, in respiratory alkalosis, right here, take note that the most important indicator of adequacy of respiratory function here is the pressure of carbon dioxide or the level of carbon dioxide. Usually, the normal level is between 35 to 50 to 45 millimeters of mercury pressure. Now, your carbon dioxide, if it becomes 45 millimeters of mercury pressure, then the body experiences respiratory acidosis. That's respiratory acidosis. It is a common cause of acid-base imbalance due to decrease in ventilation or gas exchange. And these are very common among people with emphysema, pneumonia, cystic fibrosis also. Carbon dioxide accumulates in the blood and the blood pH drops. Now, when the blood is below 35, when the blood carbon dioxide level is below 35 millimeters of mercury pressure, respiratory alkalosis will happen. It is the most common result of hyperventilation. When we hyperventilate, we lose really a lot of our carbon dioxide, and the level of carbon dioxide would now lower than 35 millimeters of mercury pressure. Often this is due to stress or even pain. Carbon dioxide is eliminated faster than we have produced it. You're probably going to say, good, I'm going to lose carbon dioxide. I don't need that. That's a waste gas. But yes, indeed, it's actually a waste gas. It's a waste product of cellular respiration. But carbon dioxide plays a major role in the balance of acid and base in the body. We cannot, it is present in our body and within that normal range. We wanted it to stay there. It helps in the maintenance of the acid and basic balance of the body. And here you go, guys. I would like you to revisit this. If you have the chance, this is actually a very good um, way to review for your next lecture exam. This table here gives you the causes and consequences of acid-base balance. We're getting into near the end of the slide. Again, by looking at, instead of respiratory acidosis and alkalosis, we are now going to get into the understanding of metabolic alkalosis and acidosis. Metabolic acidosis pretty much happens in low blood or results in low blood pH and bicarbonates. And the causes of this will be ingestion of too much alcohol, which converts to acetic acid, excessive loss of bicarbonates. For example, if you have persistent diarrhea, accumulation of lactic acid due to exercise or shock, ketosis, which is actually a diabetic crisis, starvation, kidney failure. The blood pH would drop down below 6.8. It causes depression of the central nervous system, which can lead to coma and death. Metabolic alkalosis is actually the loss of hydrogen ion and gain of bicarbonate. It pretty much is a much less common than metabolic acidosis. Its cause would include vomiting of acid contents due to pretty much like any other reason why you would vomit. Okay, intake of excess base also would cause this alkalosis. Over ingestion of antacid also. People who have experiencing GERD, the gastroesophageal syndrome, because they're always suffering from heartburn, has a tendency really to take a lot of antacid. But what they don't know is that it can cause metabolic alkalosis. So the result here, the blood pH will develop that is above 7.8, and it causes overexcitation of the nervous system, leading to muscle tetany, extreme nervousness, convulsion, and even death, often from respiratory arrest. And here, finally, you have again a good table that can help you in your um, reviewing the causes and consequences of acid-base balance. That's it for this particular chapter, chapter 26 of acid-base balance. I will see you in chapter 27.